We are dealing with the world as it truly is, not simply waiting for the world we wish existed. At the same time, we approach this situation with a sense of concern, because the current conflict represents another failure of the international system. For decades, the United Nations Security Council passed resolutions. The International Atomic Energy Agency carried out inspections. Sanctions and diplomatic agreements were introduced again and again. Yet despite all these efforts, Iran's nuclear threat has not disappeared. Now the United States and Israel have launched strikes without first engaging the United Nations or consulting key allies, including Canada. So the question now becomes, where does the world go from here? Canada strongly condemns the attacks carried out by Iran on civilians and civilian infrastructure across the Middle East. At the same time, we are urging every side involved, including the United States and Israel, to respect international rules and obligations. Above all, we are calling for immediate de-escalation before the situation grows even more dangerous. But something remarkable just happened on the global stage in Australia. Standing before an international audience, Prime Minister Mark Carney did something very few leaders are willing to do today. He openly challenged the United States. Not quietly, not behind closed doors, but directly and publicly. During his remarks, Carney revealed that the United States, under President Donald Trump, carried out strikes on Iran without consulting its allies. Canada was not consulted. Other partners were not consulted. Even the United Nations was bypassed. Carney made it clear that this kind of unilateral action is precisely what is weakening the international system. When powerful nations begin acting alone, alliances weaken. Trust begins to fade. And the stability that once held the global order together starts to crack. But instead of remaining silent, Carney chose to speak openly. And that moment explains why more world leaders are now inviting him to visit their countries. Because in a time marked by tension and uncertainty, Mark Carney is trying to position Canada as something different, a nation that supports cooperation, alliances, and international rules, even when it means questioning the most powerful country in the world. The message he delivered in Australia was clear. The old global order is beginning to fracture, and Canada refuses to simply stand by and watch. Before addressing economic pressure, Carney first spoke about something even larger. According to him, the world is experiencing a major rupture in the global system. The rules that once governed international trade, diplomacy, and security are breaking down. Institutions that were meant to stabilize the world are struggling to keep up with modern crises, and what may replace them could be far more dangerous. Today, major powers are increasingly using economic integration as a tool of influence. Tariffs are being used as pressure. Supply chains are becoming strategic weapons. Financial systems are turning into instruments of political leverage. In other words, globalization once meant to create cooperation is now sometimes being used to enforce dominance. And that reality has changed how countries like Canada must operate. Because when international rules no longer protect you, you must begin protecting yourself. Carney explained that the world is moving away from the traditional rules-based international order. A new system will eventually emerge, but it has not yet been built. Global institutions have often reacted too slowly to crises, and when they do respond, they are sometimes ineffective. More recently, powerful countries have started using economic relationships as leverage, tariffs as pressure points, financial infrastructure as coercive tools, and supply chains as vulnerabilities that can be exploited. Carney warned that nations cannot continue believing in mutual benefit through global integration, if that integration becomes a source of dependence or subordination. Geopolitically, some dominant powers are increasingly acting without constraints or regard for international norms, while other countries are left to deal with the consequences. Then came the moment when Carney addressed the issue everyone in the room understood. Without immediately naming Trump, he described a strategy that has become increasingly common, using tariffs, market access, and economic dominance as political leverage. Some powerful countries, he explained, are now effectively charging others for access to their markets. This goes beyond trade negotiations. It involves demanding political concessions and influencing domestic policies in other nations, from taxation rules to digital regulation and cultural policy. In short, economic power is becoming a geopolitical weapon. But Carney's message was clear. That strategy might succeed for a period of time, but it cannot work forever. Because when countries realize they are being pressured or coerced, they begin to change their behavior. They diversify their partnerships. They build new alliances. And they avoid becoming dependent on any single country. Even analysts in the United States are beginning to question whether this approach could eventually damage America's global reputation, leaving the country feared, but not trusted. Carney explained that monetizing dominance, charging countries for access to a powerful market, can only work temporarily. Eventually, other nations react by diversifying their economic relationships and reducing their dependence. And that reaction has already started. Countries are expanding trade partnerships beyond the United States. New coalitions of middle powers are forming. Governments are working to ensure that no single nation can control their economic future. Canada is doing exactly that. Over the past several months, Carney has traveled extensively across Europe, the Middle East, India, and now Australia. These trips are not only about trade deals. They are about building what he calls a dense web of partnerships. Partnerships designed to protect sovereignty, strengthen resilience, and ensure economic independence. Because in a world where powerful nations attempt to dictate terms, diversification becomes the strongest form of protection. Carney argues that true sovereignty cannot be achieved in isolation. It requires cooperation and diversified partnerships. Canada is therefore working to build flexible coalitions with countries that share common interests on specific issues. Major powers may have the ability to act alone because of their large economies and military strength. But middle powers like Canada operate differently. In an era of intense rivalry between great powers, countries like Canada face a choice: compete with each other for influence, or cooperate to create a third path with real impact. When all of these pieces come together, the message Carney delivered in Australia becomes clear. The world is changing. The era of unquestioned dominance is fading. And countries that once relied heavily on economic pressure are beginning to discover something uncomfortable. Their leverage only works as long as other countries remain dependent. Once those countries diversify, the balance of power begins to shift. That is exactly what Canada is trying to do under Mark Carney. Instead of reacting to pressure, Canada is building partnerships. Instead of retreating into isolation, it is expanding its presence around the world. And instead of allowing tariffs or threats to determine its future, Canada is making sure it has options across multiple regions and alliances. That is also why leaders around the world are increasingly inviting Carney to their capitals. At a time when global politics feels uncertain and unstable, he is offering something many countries are: searching for clarity, strategy, and a vision for the future of international cooperation. This moment tells us a great deal about the kind of leadership Mark Carney is bringing to the global stage. While many leaders choose silence, he is willing to openly discuss the realities shaping the modern world, from trade pressure and geopolitical conflict to the shifting balance of global power. If you want clear analysis of these global developments and how Canada is navigating this new era of international politics, make sure to subscribe to Canada Today, turn on notifications, and stay with us for every major update. And let us know in the comments, do you think more world leaders should speak as openly as Mark Carney when addressing leaders like Donald Trump and the changing global order?